About 20 years ago, my honey and I were in San Francisco, and I was going to my favorite Old West emporium, and that would be the Argonaut bookstore on Sutter Street. And I was in there looking at all these old musty first edition books, just love the place. And as a matter of fact, they have old photographs and all kinds of items that I absolutely love. Anyway, I bought this photograph of a lot of Crabtree. That was one of the things I bought that day, and you may recognize that. It's the same image I painted from to create this cover for our latest book on the Hellraisers and Trailblazers, the real woman of the Wild West. And so I was looking around. I'm just in heaven, and my wife, who was a former elementary school teacher, by the way, she says, "Hey, what about this? These are mugshots carried by a California sheriff in the 1850s." And I scrunched up my nose and I said, "No, I'm not interested in that." And she said, "Pray tell, why?" And I said, "Well, they look like urban criminals, and I'm not interested in that." And she said, "Do you mean to tell me that if these guys were wearing big hats and were dressed in cowboy clothes, then you would be interested in them?" And she had a really valid point. And I said, I think I said, right as rain, Roy. And anyway, that moment brings us to a San Francisco legend, someone who should be much more famous in the Old West icons than he is. And I think this anecdote speaks to that. Of course, we're talking about Charlie Bowles, who was the gentleman bandit. He went by the moniker Black Bart. And here's the incredible thing, okay? When we think about stage robbery, invariably we think of Jesse James and the James Gang. And we also think about, in Tombstone, Curly Bill, that kind of a thing. But we rarely does Black Bart get his credit, and this is amazing. Okay, the guy pulled off 29 consecutive stage robberies without being caught. Actually, the 29th he was caught. He subsequently served time for the last stagecoach robbery of the Wells Fargo stage in California with a 6-year sentence, and he got out in 4 years and 2 months. And then he allegedly robbed 3 more stages for a grand total of 32 stagecoach robberies. Now, when you think about it, Billy the Kid didn't rob any stages or banks for that matter. And so the staggering number of stages that he robbed should put him right at the top of the Old West icons of the West. And here's part of the problem, and it comes back to my story about urban criminals. Okay, he dressed as a gentleman. That was number one. Okay, that didn't help him any, and being a brigand or a bandit. And his MO for robbing was so counterintuitive, and that's why it was so successful. Here's what he did. He would leave San Francisco. He hung out in the Popper Street area of downtown, still there, and he would take the ferry across the bay and then catch a train, and he would go to, say, Sacramento, and then he would walk to the site where he was going to rob the stage. And he always robbed the stage at the top of the hill or a place where the horses had to slow down. He worked alone. He often carried a shotgun, which he broke into 2 parts and put in a knapsack. And then he even had an ingenious way of carving out barrels of rifles and painting them black and putting them in the bushes. And then he robbed the stagecoach alone, and he would step into the road, step in front of the front horses, and say, "Throw down the box." If the guy started to get the reinsman, if he started to get frisky, he would say toward the bushes, "Don't shoot unless I tell you to do it." And the guy would look over there. They would see all these gun barrels looking at them, and they were just actually sticks. Well, like I said, he pulled this off, and then he would leave on foot. Okay, and he pulled this off 28 times. Okay, and here's why: because every posse was mounted on horseback, and they were convinced that the perpetrator, the robber, would be on horseback as well. It just you had to be, okay, because he's an outlaw and he has to ride a horse. And you can just imagine the many times that the posse went thundering by Charlie Bowles, Black Bart, and he just smiled and, pointed somewhere or whatever, and they just rode right by him and didn't even think anything about it. Well, he was finally undone on November 3rd, 1888. Oh, that's not right. Let me see here. November 3rd, 1883. I'm sorry. On Funk Hill. Okay. Now, what's so cool about this is that Funk Hill was his first robbery, the first of the 28, and he decided to go back there. That was probably a bad omen right there. And then here's the weird circumstances that led to his capture. So the stage driver, Reason McConnell, was in a mud wagon, and a mud wagon is not the Concord stage we're used to. They had wider wheels, and it was used in the backcountry where it was rough. And he picked up a passenger before he went up Funk Hill, and it was a 19-year-old kid whose name was Larry. And this kid was, I'm sorry, his name was Jimmy Rolleri, 19 years old. And he had a Henry rifle. And someone had told him the night before that there were two big bucks over there on the other side of the river, and that he should go look for them as a hunter. So they're going up the hill, Funk Hill, and Rolleri says, "Hey, let me off here. I'm going to cut across." And so as McConnell gets to the top, toward the top, out steps Charlie Bowles for the 29th robbery. And he tells him to take the horses off and to take them up the hill so that he could get in the stage and unbuckle the boot, which was the Wells Fargo thing, which was bolted to the floor. And he had to do that. And he threatened McConnell, and he said, don't come back for an hour. So McConnell goes with the horses, and he looks down in the meadow, and here comes Rolleri with his Henry rifle. And so he's waving at him, and he goes running down there, and he goes, "Hey, we got a stage robber at the top of the hill. Come with me." So they go up the hill, and they're about 100 yards from the stagecoach when all of a sudden Charlie Bowles comes out of the stagecoach, spots them. McConnell grabs the rifle, shoots twice, misses both times. By now, Charlie Bowles is going to run, and the kid says, "Let me shoot," and he shoots, hits Charlie Bowles in the hand, and he keeps running. But here's the key point. He left behind several things. One of them was a derby, and one of them was a handkerchief with a laundry mark. And so they took that laundry mark, and James Humes, the detective who was in charge of this case, went to 91 laundries to compare that laundry mark. Okay. And they were able to narrow it down to Charles Bowles. And so he was done in by a handkerchief with a laundry mark on it. I know it sounds like something from a Dragnet, not from the Old West, which, by the way, is even more of a reason why he's not remembered, because it doesn't fit the archetype of the Western story. He's dressed as a gentleman. He's on foot. He doesn't ride a horse. He has a laundry. He has a handkerchief. And here's another thing: he never shot anybody. Now he shot at a fleeing stage one time when the stage took off, and there was a myth that his shotgun wasn't even loaded. That turns out not to be true. So now Charles Bowles is convicted of the one stage robbery. He gets a very light sentence of 6 years in jail, and he goes to San Quentin. He only serves 4 years and 2 months, and he's let out, and he swears that he's going to go straight, and then the robberies start again. And there's 3 more robberies, and everybody in the state knows that it's Black Bart. And by the way, Black Bart was he read a book. Actually, it was a serialized story in the newspaper called "The Case of Summerfield" by William H. Rhodes. And in that story, fictional story, actually science fiction, where a guy discovers how to set water on fire and he's going to take over the world. There is a stagecoach robber in the story named Bartholomew Graham, and otherwise known as Black Bart. And so Charles Bowles picks up that name out of the newspaper and just uses it. Now, if you probably know the story at all, you know that he was known as the poet, Poet, 808, the number 8, and that he left doggerel or bad poems at all of his robberies. Well, that's not true. He left one at his fourth robbery, and he left one at the fifth robbery, and that's the only ones he left. Now they're described as doggerel, but I got to tell you, I think they're actually pretty clever. And let me see if I can find this here, because I want to read you to it. It is just so great. It is, I've labored long and hard for honor and for riches, but on my corns too long you've tread, you fine-haired sons of bitches. Now, I don't know about you, but that stands up to anything that Longfellow ever came up with. I don't think it's dogger at all. I think it's really clever. Now, here's the weird thing. He's such a good writer. If he was alive today, he'd probably have his own Netflix special. That's what I think of his doggerel. It's pretty amazing. Now, he does these 3 extra robberies. Okay, they had all the earmarks of Charles Bowles, Black Bart, and he disappears. And so my good friend, John Bozenecker, who has written a new book on Black Bart, it's called Gentleman Bandit, The True Story of Black Bart, the Old West Most Infamous Stagecoach Robber, by John Bozenecker. I highly recommend it, because at the end of the book, John surmises what probably happened to him, and this is my favorite. All right. One theory was that Bowles went back east. One even says he went to China. There's a couple of theories that he went to Central America, and there's one in Mexico. They spotted him in Durango, Mexico. But Charles Bowles wrote to an old Army friend of his. He was in the Civil War, and he enlisted as a Union private in the company of the 116th Infantry, Illinois Volunteer Infantry, and he participated in 17 battles, okay, including Vicksburg. Okay, so the guy, he was a sergeant, so he had some chops. The guy was really pretty good. He wrote a letter, Charles, we think, wrote a letter to a friend in San Jose who he was in the Army with, and he told what happened. And he said that he took the earnings from his last 3 robberies. It was about $5,000. And he went to, they think, either Arizona or New Mexico, and lived out his life in the lap of luxury as a cattleman. That's the story I want to believe. But isn't it amazing? At the end of the day, why aren't there more movies about this? Well, it's because it doesn't fit the archetype of what we want. Think about it. There's been 67 movies on Billy the Kid. There's been 37 and counting on Jesse James. The same is true of Wyatt Earp. How many movies on Black Bart have there been? Well, there's really only one, okay, with his name in the title. I'm sure there must be some others where he's a character, perhaps, but I've never really seen them. And there's one in 1948. Dan Duryea is a bandit, and of course he rides a horse. Of course, it's a B Western kind of a thing. He ends up being killed by a posse, all of which never happened to the real guy. And I think it's because the story is too strange for Westerns. Isn't that crazy? That's why I think Charles Bowles is one of the most amazing characters ever in the Wild West. Hey, if you want to do your part for this, click like at the bottom. We cover these stories all the time. I'll see you next time.